Yeah, I'm fine. Why?
All right, we'll come to order, please.
I haven't.
That's good.
We got a little bit worth of.
So.
All right.
Grab anybody.
Roots, I got like 3 left. 4.
So welcome to this week's version of the SBAC. We will jump right in with the first item of business is minutes from last week. Motion to adopt the minutes as submitted.
So moved?
Discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you.
James is on. So.
Okay, James is online. I know that, James, do you have something? He might need to be promoted. Thanks, Tom.
Jillian was gonna sign into you. She's there.
Denise is about to log on. There he goes.
Go ahead, James, you should be able to talk.
No.
Wait a minute, they're all being promoted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, James, we can hear you now.
Okay, yeah, just wanted to be promoted to panelist. All set, thanks.
Right. All right, should have the agenda memorized. I actually don't have a copy of it, but I believe the first item is,
Funny, I always have my computer.
Yeah,
I don't
me
need,
too.
so I'm no help.
I will admit, I left the house to go to a lacrosse game and actually forgot about this meeting, so.
Probably right behind you.
Mr. Paper. Thank you
There
so
you go.
much.
All right.
So we're gonna play the delay game a little bit, because I think Lisa is still getting on. She's gonna be remote today and has the slides. I know I've had a few questions about slides being distributed. They were not. I was just talking with Mark. The estimate came back with some weirdness, so they were actually still formatting up until right now. So so nobody missed an email. It hasn't been out yet.
And yeah, I'm just, okay, Tom, Lisa's saying that she needs to be promoted. There we go. All right, great. Yeah. All right, Lisa, can you hear it?
Do that.
Yes, I can.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
We can, so just as we're waiting for the PowerPoint to have its final tune up here before it goes live. Which we're essentially at the point of where we are in the process. So we can either hold on to that for a second and move to the subcommittee reports, including communications, or
Yeah. Why don't we do that and give Emily and Lisa a second to kind of get organized?
I can say I can pull up that part of the PowerPoint. I think it's the later slide. So why don't we go, I'll pull that up and I can take us through the first part and then give Emily a little bit more time to format here.
thank you.
It's going to take a second to open it. I do need permission to share. Awesome, thank you. me get this larger. Everyone can see that okay?
We can.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, here's the agenda. And to your point, Mark, did we do the approval of the minutes already?
Yes.
Mhm.
So where we're at in the process, similar slide to what we've seen in the past. We had a community forum last week and walked people through the different options, communicated about the survey, and we're sort of right where this blue arrow from preferred option to supported option is, and really getting all the data for you guys to be able to make that decision. This is the more detailed. We're on the 5th. We're going to meet every Monday in May except for the holiday, and a series of data points being presented throughout the month and kind of building off of one another. So in May tonight, we will walk you through where we're at with the estimate for Alt V3. Next meeting, the survey will have just closed and we'll walk you through the numbers in ABA. And so Alt V3, for those listening at home, I know everything has different names. Alt V3 is the K2, the larger K2 school, the 842 students, and it closes the existing primary schools and then does the work to Wentworth in the middle school. Option ABA is where we maintain 2 of the primary schools, Pleasant Hill and Blue Point, with renovations and additions, and then replace 8 corners, and then the same scope at Wentworth and the middle school. The intent of both of these meetings where we're presenting estimating information is literally to walk you through the information. It's not meant to make any decisions, but essentially be able to walk you through where the numbers are at, and what went into them, for again, another data point, and to give you that snapshot so we can make decisions towards the preferred option. And then on the 16th, we will have received the information on the survey. So that's really the 3rd data point of this month. So 2 estimates and the survey to really provide you guys that data to move into June, where you are making a decision on which is the supported option. With that, we'll go to committee report out.
We'll start with,
Yeah.
communications.
Leroy, you got anything? You want me to just jump to the survey?
Yeah. We've got most of the routes out. If folks can take some more routes, we have, I think, actually 5, actually more than I thought. No, there are 7. We got 7 more routes. They look like they were less, but we got 7 routes still, so people can take those and get those distributed. Excuse me. We'd really appreciate it. We got to get out to as many people as possible. We did host at Peterson Field during Little League games this weekend. We had signs up on the bathrooms, the portable toilets. We had the sandwich board sign down there. We also, through Anna Lee, had the sandwich board and signs posted for people to take the survey at the fishing derby. We have signs, sandwich board signs at all of the schools right now. And town hall, Tom has one out front for everybody coming in to take, and we have distributed quite a bit. And hopefully we can just get people to take the survey. I think we're what, 500 was what we were.
I thought it was about 430 this morning, was what I heard, but I don't know. What's that? Yes,
Yeah.
430
There's like-
completed.
300 to 400, I think, that dropped off. We did hear from a couple of people this week at Peterson, some older folks that had said that when they went in to click on the links, it kicked them out of the survey and they had to go back in and retake it. So we did get that to the survey folks. We haven't really heard back from them yet as to whether or not they were able to fix it, or if it's something within people's pop-ups or blockers or something that's kicking them out. But there's quite a few that have only gone through a few questions and haven't completed them as of yet. And you can add on.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the same thing last time. I mean, there's a number of people who start and don't finish. And it's possible that the info we got from people who said they were kicked out of the survey, that it's a little user error. It happens to be older folks, and then they're doing it on a computer, and then maybe, puts them into a different window, and then they don't know how to get back to the window that they were in, we're not sure. But survey team's looking into that, we're trying to get more details, see if there's anything we can troubleshoot on that, but other than that, we just gotta try to get as many responses as possible. So, and that's on you guys, cause we gotta get flyers out, and I sent an email to everybody, and it's very easy to just forward that to your community groups, to your network, whoever you got. But if we can break 1,000, that would be really good. I think we got 1,200 surveys completed last time. So it'd be nice to break 1,000 if we can do that, and that's really just on all of us for getting it out there. And as Leroy said, there are plenty more flyers to.
Yeah,
hand out.
we really need everyone's help on this to try to get it out there. So any groups that you're part of, please send that email to. I've reached out to Project Grace. It is on the community calendar. I've also reached out to Rotary, Kiwanis, Annalise distributed through all the folks there, Scarborough Lions Club, Little League, and a couple other groups. I know I'm missing a couple, but I'm gonna try to reach out to some more groups.
Yeah. It's a
This
group of
weekend.
stuff, yeah. It's just, this is us putting it out, getting friends to share it and get it out there. We're also advertising on Facebook and, we're getting out there electronically as much as we can, but it's all of us.
Yeah, there's only 4 or 5 of us, so we really need everybody's help on this, especially on these, just to get them out in people's hands. And the more houses we get them out to, the more people will be talking about it. Ask Jim, because he goes home and basically, how many people did you have at your house the other day wanting to take the survey from you? 10 people that met you at your house or something?
Yeah. I was in the driveway trying to get groceries in the house. People walking in the neighborhood.
Town hall right in your driveway.
Yes.
You could just have a Dropbox
Hold on.
right outside.
I
I'm
have-
hearing
Yes.
I had about 10
cooler
people
with
walking.
a label on it.
That's awesome. Good.
Oh, it is on the
Yeah.
reader boards too. It has been on the reader board for the Wentworth School. It has been on the reader board for the library. Mark Maroon's building had it up. I had asked for Evergreen. I haven't been down to Dunstan recently, so I don't know if it's down there. I did ask people to put it up again this week and this weekend to try to get it out there as much as possible. And Lions has like a little board out inside of their building on Gorham Road in Scarborough. And I asked Jerry if he could put something out on that. So hopefully we'll get something out on there as well.
Appreciate it. Yeah, the social media blitz has been really good. Thank you guys. I've been seeing it from both the town and the schools'
Yep.
social media. So thank you.
Yeah, the town's been very helpful. Thank you, Tom, and thank Allison for us.
Let's go out today too, that Brian just sent us, that he,
Yeah, I mean, it's
yeah.
ongoing.
And you go to a town site and it's the first thing that pops up. You go to the school site, it's the first thing that pops up. You can't miss it. It is annoying, but it's there.
Right.
People cannot miss it if they go there.
Leroy, I did a route down in Pine Point and was really encouraged. I didn't see a lot of people live, but so if I did 50 houses, I probably saw 15 to 20 live, besides just leaving them on the door. And at least 10 of them knew about it, commented that I know you've gone from 4 to 2 options. I've already taken the survey. I mean, it was much better than what I expected. Just the word was out.
It's
Good.
true, which is great. It's just a matter of closing the deal now, getting people
Yeah.
to take 15 minutes and actually, sit and do it. So
Is that the estimated completion time, 15?
we say
That's
10 to
less,
15,
yeah.
and I think it's reasonable.
Question of admitting I haven't taken.
Well, and it's hard because we're biased because I thought it was like really short this time.
Right, I know,
But
Right.
I didn't need to go into the auxiliary materials
I
and,
know.
once I got
Yeah.
the gist of the question, I kind of just went, oh, okay, yeah, do.
Yeah,
But
right.
Tom, you could probably do it.
We don't like-
if you've been following along, the surveys seemed very straightforward.
Yes.
Oh. Just
Oh, and
for those
Hannaford has it up as well.
Playing along, Emily just sent the slides if you want to pull those up.
Yeah,
think
I can pull them up.
But it won't be
estimate
for lack of
is
trying, you guys, so thank you so much, and I did my route and same, I think I talked to 10. And otherwise, my daughter and I just put them on the door,
And thank you for everybody for passing those out. We really appreciate it.
no problem.
Yeah, and just as Leroy started, if you didn't take a route or if you can do another route, please help, get to those neighborhoods that we haven't put flyers in. All right, thank you. Tom, anything from the site selection committee?
No, vertical season is still live, so they're monitoring. Nothing new to report.
All right, we'll keep waiting on the salamanders. Okay, from the leadership team, really not a ton to update today. I think we'll just jump straight to the forum feedback. Thank you first off to Larry for covering that for us. I heard good things. So anxious to kind of hear from you guys how it went.
Excellent. All right, we have the themes in here. Larry, do you want to walk us through the themes of the community forum?
Sure. I'm going to read these for the first time. There was a lot of questions about the split of the student population between the three schools and the neighborhood option. And I might overlap a couple of these, just not read them off the screen. There was a few questions about, couldn't we make the replacement school, the new school, even larger to make the two remaining neighborhood schools smaller, with the idea for a couple of different reasons. One was cost question, one was improving the site, outdoor play areas and things. And Lisa actually did a good job explaining that if you got rid of a few classrooms, it didn't really substantially change the footprint. One point that we didn't make that we realized later is that we think the people asking those questions, the people asking the questions weren't thinking of the fact that we were replacing all the portables. You know, they were thinking about isn't just the school part, and we were replacing that. So there was a couple of questions about kind of the additional number of students in those two schools for the cost of the project. I forget the example that one gentleman used of saying, you know, it's only an addition of 25 kids, but it costs, you know, millions of dollars. It seems like it could be a different outcome. So
Yeah,
that,
I think looking at just to interject for a second, Larry, I think
Yeah,
looking
thanks.
at the footprint, they're saying, well, I'll use Blue Point, for example, or maybe even we can use Pleasant Hill. You have what was shown as the existing building and then the addition, and it looked like we were doubling. They used the word doubling the footprint, but it didn't equate to doubling the number of students. And there's a small increase in student population. And it looked like we were doubling the footprint. But what wasn't clear on the diagram is there were portables that were removed and permanent square footage put in its place. So in reality, you are not doubling the footprint, you are replacing sections of that. So we need to make that clear in our communication. And I think on the diagrams going forward, we need to show where those were and what was removed. So that's makes more sense, because when you just look at the diagram quickly, it looks like, wow, you're adding so much more square footage and the number of students is going up minimally. There's two things. One, we are replacing square footage that you don't see on that diagram. And two, some of those programs are undersized and they're being right-sized through the program.
Yeah, I think that second bullet that second piece you just said, Lisa, is important to highlight, right? Like you're doubling partly because they're so overpopulated today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it makes sense, but.
well, and sorry. And some of that space is also the community facility, and they're adding a cafeteria as opposed to a combined facility and also.
Correct.
There was a question about the number that we're giving for the operating cost for the staffing cost at 2.6 million, less for the consolidated school. They wanted to know, the question was, would we then be laying off staff? You know, the example was that we need less staffing to run the consolidated school. So therefore, would you be laying off staff? And Diane, in that case, did a good job of explaining that we'll grow into that school. It's the day it opens, it isn't filled. And also that there'll be increased staffing overall because the schools are bigger, the population's bigger. It's just the staffing comes more in the operational efficiencies of running the consolidated school. But that is she said that has come up before as they've made other choices around class size and all kinds of things. People are always concerned that how does that affect the staffing of the whole district? And we would grow into it, and then there'd also be some natural attrition during that time frame as well.
Yeah, so another way to think about it is as you grow into that school, you just don't hire additional teachers because you need fewer in the consolidated model than the the 3 school. And to your point, attrition happens with retirements and other things like that. You just would not replace those teachers.
And then there were a few different, maybe 2 questions around the lifespan of the renovations. And really what they were saying, we're gonna bond this for 30 years. Will the school or the renovations and improvements last 30 years? And again, Lisa explained on that one about kind of the lifespan of renovated facilities and, you know, mechanicals and everything. And Lisa, you had a number of closer to 50 years, right?
Well, for a new build, so when you
Yeah.
replace, so there's a organization called the National School for Educational Statistics, and they essentially say that majority of school buildings are retired after 60 years. So they use sort of a 60-year lifespan with a new build. They typically say that you will have a major renovation after 40 years of that new build. Depending on the level of renovation that you're doing will depend on its lifespan. So, I mean, there's certain things that need to be replaced every 15 years. So, you know, different, and also based on wear and tear. So depending on how well things are taken care of, and I know Todd does a great job of taking care of the schools. So certain flooring is going to have a certain lifespan, but I'll use mechanical, for example. Some of those systems do need to be replaced after 20 years. And so some of those will, regardless if it's new or renovation, fall within that before that bond. And the level of renovation, there's certain things we won't be touching that we won't extend the life as far. So you'll get the benefit of new build is you're really resetting the clock and being able to push that lifespan out much further than you would on a renovation. So some of the renovations are somewhere, I would say, and correct me if you think differently, Mark, but between 20 and 40 years, depending on what you're touching.
Yeah, that's correct.
I think this is a common question from the public often. Is there state or federal funding available? And Diane went through a short version of the kind of the process and the history on the state funding and the rankings that the state does, and they don't issue it every year. And we're in the process now. We've submitted an application already, regardless of this project, just for the current school district. And I think she set a realistic expectation for the amount of funding, if at all, that Scarborough could get for any of this.
Yeah, I think Todd was heavily involved in those applications. And correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, but you submitted applications for all 3 K2s and the middle school, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and the state came out recently and walked those buildings with Todd and Diane. And those 4 applications were 4 out of, I think they have 97 applications this cycle. The funding cycle comes out on average every 7 years. So Scarborough applied 7 years ago, and I think one of your schools was probably around the 35, I'm working off of memory, mark, and the others were lower on the list. And they funded, I think, 9 out of 74 schools last time, and this time around they have 97 that have applied. So the likelihood of Scarborough receiving funding is not as favorable as we would like.
I do think with that, there's a misconception sometimes that it is because of the affluence of the town. And I don't know that that's a factor in it at all, right?
No, the way it was
Yeah.
explained to me by the people who visited is, it's really, it's all relative. So if you go to some of these rural neighborhoods in Maine, they haven't even had money to keep their schools maintained like we have. So even though our schools are overcrowded and we have portables on a lot of them, they're in decent condition, and they're looking at schools that are literally falling apart and have serious hazardous materials in them, and, you know, rusting and broken out doors. I mean, it really
Aggressive issues.
really dilapidated condition in some of these communities that haven't had the finances to keep them maintained properly. And so it's really just It's a matter of, it's all relative when you compare them across 90 schools in our state. So that's the way it was explained to me.
And the not surprising question about pre-K came up and what we do with that. We, at one point, I explained, it was not in the context of that question, but I explained by replacing 8 corners, even though we'll have to buy a new site for that or for the consolidated, it still remains an asset for the town and it could be used for another community purpose without saying it would be for pre-K certainly, but I think that's what people are kind of thinking would make sense. So we did explain that none of these current options that we're working on include pre-K, and I think it was just kind of factual. It didn't turn in anything else. And when will the enrollment increases are expected? And we went through the live burst that'll hit pre-K or primary first, and it gave them the timeframes for kind of when it would hit primary, Wentworth, and middle school.
Yeah, and I think just to so that everybody knows what we're doing right now with all of these themes is working to provide responses, written responses, so that we can have educational piece that outlines what the themes are and then what the responses are, so everybody has the same information. And so I know Emily and myself and others are going through right now to address all of these. So we may not have all the answers this evening to all of these, but they are in process. And I think, Emily, you have the data on this, the increases when they're expected.
Yep, I do.
And we were talking about kind of incorporating that into some of it. We're deciding still on whether we go into an FAQ type format or maybe be elevated to more of a real focus of the explanation of the project.
And turning it into some educational pieces
Right.
is likely.
All right, going on to the next one.
This was some confusion, I believe, around that. I might be wrong on this, Lisa, but I think this was about some confusion with people were looking at that 2.6 million as on top of the current costs of operating the schools. And we were trying to explain a little bit that it was really the efficiency differences between the two options.
Well,
I think it was about sort of how the tax
Yeah.
impact equated to what it
This was the
did.
question that I had
Right.
when she first sent the operating costs, and I was like, how does a 2.6 million a year equal this? And Elizabeth did the math for me because I wasn't thinking straight, but
Your basic math.
yeah, it's about a 30, you're paying one off
Oh,
of
right.
over 30 years, the other one is an annual cost. And so that's why it's such a drastic difference. When you just take the numbers at face value, you go, that doesn't make sense. If you think about it just longer than I did, it makes perfect sense.
Nice.
Longer than I did reading the slides.
But I do think it is incumbent on us to keep explaining this and explaining it well. I think what Tom has provided about the tax impact of the build cost is very detailed, and there's a model that people can look at. And we've put the information out there about the staffing cost, and it's $2.6 million between the two. And we've talked about the fact that that translates into, close to $200 a year for the average taxpayer. But we are getting some questions about, well, how does the math really work on that? So we've got an FAQ up that addresses it, but there are people still looking for more details. Like, what are the assumptions? And I think we kind of owe that to the public to lay it out for them so they can really.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up towards the end of this, but since you mentioned it now, we have received 4 requests, I think, since the survey went out about the operating costs, specifically looking for essentially the space allocation worksheet. What are the assumptions around salaries and things like that went into calculating that 2.6? So I don't have an answer yet. We need to figure that out. Diane is obviously away tonight, and so we'll talk through that and figure out what we can provide.
Yeah, I mean, she's got that. It's just a matter, I think, of putting it in a digestible format, you know.
I had a couple questions on that. What we showed was cost to the schools. They asked, what's the additional cost on the town side? We're saying roughly $200 increase for the school. But what is the additional cost on taxes on the town budget?
Yeah, our model built in is assumption based, but you know, annual growth in our operating expenses, both town and schools. So all of that is kind of built into the background. You know, these models really are designed to, in addition to that background growth, is really analyzing and understanding the impact of this project on top of all the other stuff we do normally.
Yeah, someone had made the point last week that if the savings every year would be $190 to $200 if we went with the consolidated model, that the total impact on your tax bill, if you were offsetting like the additional cost to pay the debt minus the, but Diane's explanation that there wouldn't be any layoffs or, you know, rifts or anything, that we would grow into it, kind of implies that there really, you won't experience that $190 to $200 cost savings. As a minus, you might experience an additional $190 to $200 in taxes if we didn't do the consolidated. Does that make
I
sense?
think the way I understood that was, it was more, if you went with it was comparing the two options. So if you did the staffing costs, and it wasn't today's cost, if you did the staffing cost when the school was built, and you got to the number 13 or something, I can't remember, but that then if you compared that to the consolidated option, the staffing cost would be less than the other option, not less than today, not less than, I don't know if that helps at all, but.
Well,
Essentially, one's $200 more to run per year than the other. So whether you look at it as a reduction or an increase, is.
but I think Sue's point is, I was actually thinking the same thing, right? Like if, I don't understand the grow into it answer if, right, the reality is we have 4 principals today, you'd need 1 principal in that model and 1 assistant, and right, like, I mean, how do we grow? I'm not sure what she meant by that.
Both today.
3, thank you, yeah.
I'm not trying to like.
Yeah.
Right, so we have 3 principals today, and I think, and this is hard because our school board reps aren't here and Diane's not here, so I certainly don't want to, and Ray's not here, so I don't want to speak out of my lane, but I think what I have heard in the past, the explanation is, you know, we wouldn't be able to operate a school of the consolidated school size with just 1 principal, right? We would probably likely need 2 people in a position, whether that's a shared position, whatever that looks like. But the way Diane ran her model was staffing the consolidated school, and it's not a 1-for-1. So we're not dropping 3 principals to 1 principal necessarily. But there were staffing efficiencies that we were like, we don't need 6, you know, nurses, we need 2, right?
Yeah.
So whoever's staffing the nursing, like we would need fewer. But again, like it's a bigger school than what we're operating now. And so we can't just assume that we're going from 3 to 1 in every instance. And so I think that my sense is that the fine line Diane is trying to walk is being an alarmist about the community being very upset that we are cutting positions, or that we're going to have a bunch of teachers and staff that are laid off if we go to the consolidated model, and just make sure that that's not a panic button, that people are really worried about our staff, because people are protective of our staff and they don't want to hear that people are potentially going to lose their jobs. And so I think Diane's point is, as we figure out how to bring Pleasant Hill, Blue Point, and 8 Corners staff into the consolidated school, we are naturally maybe going to have people that retire that year. And we just wouldn't replace those people's jobs. And so we're not laying off people, we're just allowing people who would otherwise be leaving the district to leave.
But so I don't mean to.
No,
anchor
that's
on this,
okay.
But that means, right, that if you're getting to that $190 to $200 savings through attrition, you're not gonna realize that until maybe year 5, 6, 10, right? We don't know when we
I
get
think it's a
there.
mix of, and again, I'm way out of my pay
Yeah,
grade here, but you know, I think it's a mix of attrition and then
So,
not just not needing as many custodians or not needing
Sure.
as many.
Yeah, I think I think there's enough question around this. And obviously, like I said, we've gotten a bunch of emails, so I'll put an agenda item on next week to kind of walk through the staffing. And
we
kinda
can
get
do
that out
different
and figure
things
it
with
out.
the Model, I mean, I think Diane's is very detailed.
Yeah.
She presumably has all the backup as to how she came up with that. We were just given a number of $2.6 million. What does it do to the tax bill? So it's very blunt in that regard.
Yeah.
We can probably make it far more nuanced with a little more details.
Well, I think that shows that, you know, we're going through these saying, these are the questions we want to be able to
Sure.
answer for the community.
Mhm.
And obviously just from us, we need some more work on it as well. So I think it's certainly the right idea is certainly for us to get our arms around it, but then to be able to concisely explain it
Yeah.
and
It's
present it.
very basic. Do you think the purpose is accomplished, which is, it's just more efficient to run, intuitively, it's more efficient to run, a larger school than smaller schools. I mean, that's the key takeaway, and how fine grained and how, putting a dollar to it is something we should talk further about, but that's the piece we want to impress upon people, isn't it?
Right, but if we're gonna present that, because it's certainly an advantage, and I heard from a lot of people since that changed their mind on, if the operating cost was gonna be that much of a factor, then maybe they would not think that was worth the change to make it all neighborhood schools. So we need to make sure if people are hanging their hats on that as how they're making their decisions, even us, we will need to understand that better, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely like to understand from the school side too, how much of it is staff, how much of it is building efficiency, how much of it is transportation, how much of it is providing meals. Like there's definitely efficiencies that are being created that the public, that have a price tag
And
associated.
she did, and I want to put a pin in this because it's not fair really to not have any school reps here, but she did put in her one pager that it's staffing only. It didn't really address a lot like the food, the busing and a lot of those other things. So we'll just put a pin in it and I'll put it on the agenda for next week to deep dive a little bit.
I can tell you from maintenance and custodial, it would take more people for multiple schools than one.
Yeah.
To support what
Right.
Tom said, it's
Yeah.
an efficiency thing. You have.
Yeah, and I'll just say, if
More
this is a
places
late
to go.
request from Elizabeth to kind of get something on this in the survey, and Elizabeth, I think my initial response was, I think it might be a bit dangerous to get too fine grained on this. I mean,
Yeah.
to make the kind of intuitive statement that it's cheaper to run, may be the best we can do. But I think we ought to run this to ground to see if we can tighten it up a bit further.
Yep.
How long have the portables been in service? That came up, and I think that's one we're gonna want to explain a little bit there's some question around, well, wait, can't we just keep going with the portables? And I think we need to explain the life expectancy versus how long they've already been there. That maybe some piece around the cost of maintaining those portables as in equating that to the renovation or the replacement. Lisa, on the longer bus rides, that came up, and I think that our answer on that is we can't really predict that until we finalize a site. And there was a question around bus routes, and I think if younger kids would be riding with older kids and also, but that is one I think it will be wrapped up in the site decision. But I think then if we're going to be able to give them the site decision, we'll need to follow up to some part of that. And I understand that we're not going to be able to tell them these are the districts, but people are certainly worried about. I heard from one person about, well, Pleasant Hill's being retained, but I live far away from Pleasant Hill. My kids go to school there, but so I could get cut and put into the, and I just said, yes, that's possible, but
I think there was general, I think Diane talked about redistricting has to happen periodically and you
yeah.
just can't predict, you can't make a definitive statement about what's gonna happen.
But they also make unique decisions to keep siblings together and those sorts of things. So, I think there's ways to do that to reduce impact.
How would tariffs affect the project? Lisa saved me from making a terribly blunt statement.
Well-
About who knows?
I'll be your phone a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously, like everyone, we're all trying to figure out what is going on, but we're working with our cost estimator right now to try to summarize an approach to provide some guidance on what to do with the little bit that's known about the tariffs right now. So we will follow up with them on that and be able to present that at the next meeting.
Lisa, once we have that, that's probably one of the most common questions that I get talking about this project. So I think as soon as we have something, an FAQ, that's got to go on the webpage if we get something.
Yeah, it'll be caveated a lot given the
Yeah.
current climate, but yes, I think we need to put something towards it because it is an impact. Well, I mean, yeah, if COVID did the same thing. It increased costs, and so there's always something.
I know it's not tariff specific, but rather than predicting the future, which is
Mhm.
nearly possible, is it of value to kind of look at history? And I mean, the basic point that this project is going to cost more next year than it will this year. I think we can validate with looking backward and with data. And I know it doesn't answer this question, but I think that's an important feature, that the problem doesn't go away. It just more than likely will be more expensive.
Correct. No, I think a valid point, and we will make that point too, that every year, right now is always the less expensive time to do it than waiting. Regardless of what is in front of us, if it's tariffs or something else, the cost continues to escalate. So we will, but I think they're almost two separate items a little bit. We'll try to wrap our arms around both of them.
And Lisa also gave an explanation as the concern of running out of tradespeople, which is a question we've heard a little bit about doing all the projects at once. The person asking the question was pointed out that it's really 5 projects and, do you have concern about that?
Yeah, I think, and the example they made was, if you try to call somebody to do drywall in your house, it's hard to find anybody. These are different pools of contractors we're pulling from. So those typically that do residential are not the same that do commercial. I won't say that that is 100% all the time, but typically those contractors that would be pursuing a project like this would, first of all, if we were to do it all as one contractor, all the projects under one contractor, it would need to be out of the pool of larger contractors that do that. If we were to break it into several projects as into, one contractor for the larger K2 and others for the renovation addition, and that all is to be determined, but we would look at those that were qualified for that size project. And we've done this both ways on projects where we have one contractor oversee multiple, and we have also broken it apart into smaller projects for a different pool of contractors that are all, we would all pre-qualify based on their experience in school construction. So it's going to be one of those things that we continue to look at the current market and what is happening in regards to construction. We are seeing a little bit of to where the contractors are a little more, I'll say, hungry and are trying to go after a lot more projects to kind of solidify their backlog, if you will. So that is a good sign for the project. But we'll continue to monitor that. It can be done both ways with the contractors we are aware of in the marketplace.
All right. I just had a couple other, was that your list, Lisa? You all set?
Let me just make sure there wasn't anything else Yep, that was it.
I just had a couple of comments that from being there that, and thank you for those of you who showed up. That was great. I think that this time people voiced a preference more so than the first one, which is easier because we were down to two options. But Jim and I compared afterwards, and I was just keeping a little hash list of the people who voiced preferences. It was almost exactly even between the two options. So it wasn't a big learning there as far as coming out of the forum, but I was encouraged that people were more decisive. I thought the Slido tool that we used where people could anonymously ask questions and that was really effective. We got definitely more questions than the first forum. I think people had time to think through and their question, and lots of people aren't comfortable getting up in front of that room to ask their question. So that was, if we go through that again, I would say that was really a good tool for us. And then finally, I mean, almost everyone was really, really complimentary of the work that we're doing. It really came through strong, both people in person and on the Slido. So that was rewarding.
Do we know how many people?
I was gonna say, how many people and how long
We
did
had
you go
about
for?
20 people in person that weren't associated with the project from the head count I did, and about 20 online. I will say that I have had multiple people let me know that they watched it, but not through Zoom, which means they were streaming it. So I think there's more people that were reached than we could count. And I will say that we ended almost right on time. Yeah. The other comment that I heard, probably from a couple commenters, I had a similar tally. It was pretty much a dead split between the two options based on those that attended and voiced their opinion. But I also heard from a few folks that here is my preference. However, I will support what you put on the referendum because something needs to happen. So there are a few of those comments as well. So those were kind of our takeaways from it.
That's really positive.
I'm hearing that too.
Over the weekend, starting Thursday through this morning, I got 12 or 14 emails, phone calls on the forum. They thought it was excellent. They thought it was presented in a manner where people could follow through and understand what was being offered. Did have some questions. The biggest question is, are we going to be able to reduce the cost? Cost was a big item with all. There were two that were seniors that were concerned about the taxes. Whether or not they could have kept their tax increase because they have no children and pass the additional cost on to families that do have kids in the school. They're concerned with what's going on in Washington with Social Security and Medicare. Because I did get a lot of last week from Social Security saying my April check may be delivered the same time as my May check. I did not get Social Security last month. So they're concerned about that, how it impacts their budget. There was one person just recently lost her husband, lived in the house for 48 years. With the tax increases, with what little money she has, Social Security and savings, is she going to be forced out of the house? But overall, there was no negative feedback at all on the forum. They thought it was excellent.
Sorry, I did skip this last one. The enrollment bump that came through as a comment, and it's something I think as on the FAQs, we need to just clarify maybe as we go through those middle school options. I know they're on everything, and actually the actual flyer we're using for the survey, I think, is a really good explanation. But it's something, for me, it brought back what I mentioned last week about, as a committee, we talk about it. Are we going to be able to, or should we offer one or two of those options, well, my preference would be one of those options on the referendum rather than trying to solve it all ourselves, but it's certainly that's the biggest savings we've identified, but with huge consequences.
Just general question, from anybody in the room. Are we hearing concerns? I've been surprised that I haven't heard anything from parents concerned about the construction happening during school, simultaneous construction across all sites. I haven't heard any feedback. I don't know if that's because it's not well known and we're not communicating it well, or it's just not a concern. I expected there to be more to it. I'm pleased there's not, but I'm just curious if others are hearing anything on that.
Related to that, I was curious, when the site plans that Airman's developed again for the 3 school model, particularly up in Hill. Has anyone heard anything from the Pleasant Hill neighborhood as to how that is going to change the layout of their backyards? And I only ask this question because I feel like you can't please everybody. As when you're a school, you can't please every neighbor because they all differ. But when we built Wentworth, and Tom will remember this, when we cut that portion of woods and got very close to that neighborhood, we had all kinds of very not friendly reactions. And we actually added things to the cost of the project by planting buffering trees, you know, restricting certain things that the contractors could do and at what times. It was quite a lot to manage. And when I look at that Pleasant Hill site, there's not going to be a tree left. And those neighbors in the back that are nicely insulated currently by that section of woods, I don't care, you live there, you're right up against us. You know what it's like. Has anyone from Pleasant Hill been informed about the impact that that type of an addition will cause? Because to me, it's huge.
I think this group has done a very good job of communicating out about that fact. The evening that the vote happened to have 8 Corners be the school that would be replaced and Blue Point and Pleasant Hill to be the ones that would be renovated. The point about not a tree left on the Pleasant Hill site was mentioned. The question is, are the neighbors really listening? And to this point, I have heard nothing from the Pleasant Hill neighbors regarding that. So I suspect that as we get closer and zero in on which of the 2 options we're going to be talking about, we may hear more.
I would recommend if the 3 school model is the one that's chosen, we do some direct neighborhood reach out. Yeah, for sure.
I think there's a related piece of that we've shied away from too, is the how to do on those small sites, how to physically do the construction part of that project and the impacts on the educational piece of it and disruption and all that. It's going to be tough.
All right. Anything else on the forum?
One other thing that I just remembered, a couple had students in the middle school. They would like to have the middle school completed. Waited so long for a school that's been undersized and everything. We're gonna correct it all at once.
Feedback. Okay. All right, if there's nothing else on the forum, thank you all again. I know a lot of work went into that last week, so for the team that worked on that, thank you so much for doing that. I apologize again that I was not available, but I'm glad it went off as well as it did. Thank you. All right, so that will bring us then on to design updates. Lisa.
I'm going to advance the slide here. I think I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Yeah, very good. So I think this is obviously what took a little while to get the final slide updates. We're waiting for the cost estimates to come back. And so just kind of a little bit of a recap of everything that's led up to this process of trying to get, because the cost, as we've heard, is one of the most important elements that's being considered as part of this project. And so it's important to realize that our job has been to try to understand as many of the variables involved in that drive the cost so that we can get as realistic a picture as we can. And now we're starting to really, we've been working with this notion of an ROM for a long time based on some assumptions. And now we're starting to really bring more specificity to all of those items. And so as we've also mentioned, one of the biggest determinants in the cost is the area of the building. And so we've been working on understanding the programmatic needs and then test fitting those into the floor plan. And so we've been providing updates on those floor plans as we move through the process. Those have been reviewed and refined constantly. And then we get to this milestone of going out and get more detailed cost estimates that we provide not only the floor plan, but we also provide them with a narrative of all the different building systems that go into the building itself. And so with both the narrative of the building systems and also the estimators familiarity with other schools that they've priced and the areas that we've given them in the floor plan. So those all drive towards this notion of how much this we're anticipating this is going to cost. And so these are always estimates, because until you get a contractor to actually deliver what that price is going to be from a market condition, you're doing the best you can to understand what these costs are. And so that's, again, just a little bit of this whole entire process has been really to uncover as many of the variables to derive as close to an approximation of the cost as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I'll thank you for that, Mark. I'll add too that the ROM was provided prior to narrowing down sites. I know we have a handful of sites. We, through conversations, and I'm not going to mention site names due to the confidentiality around that, we have utilized one of those sites to detail out the estimate for the new build. So that's something we need to keep in mind, that this now has specific data behind it, as well as acreage and development and things like that. And it's, again, just a data point. So we can look at that, and it may most likely require that we have to circle back with the site selection committee, go through that in more detail, and then determine what needs to come back in regards to an executive session around that. Well, something to keep in mind as we go through this.
Right, the sites will impact things such as the length of utilities that you have to bring into the site, how far you have to bring them in. So there's costs associated with those, the amount of paving and things like that go into it, and even the condition of the soils on the site itself that we're building on. So those are all going to impact the cost. Certain soils will support certain foundation types, and so that has an impact in thinking about the construction cost of the building.
And I will say that the specific site that was utilized, we happen to have worked on a site near it and used that soil information. And it requires some hefty footings and foundations due to the soils. So something that was not accounted for previously. All right, then I'll advance the slide, Mark, if you want to take us through the summary.
Very good. So again, this table gives you an overview of the different scopes. So we've got the buildings identified, the new, and again, this is Alt V3. This is what we're reviewing this time. And as was mentioned earlier, our intent is to give the information to you. We'll also send out some of the backup information, such as the narrative of the building systems that we talked about, and that was sent to the estimator as well. But so this is for this option. And so the new 842 student school, the estimated construction cost for that is 81.8 million. Again, this is a summary of all of the different costs that go into that construction cost itself. As we've also talked about, the soft cost, which is again all those other costs to pay for the design of it, pay for permitting, contingencies, furniture, equipment, all of those additional things outside of the construction. And right now that's 25%. We're fine tuning that, but that's still a fairly reasonable assumption right now for the soft cost. And so that's 20.45 million on that. And that's again, just a function of a percentage on top of the estimated construction cost at this time. Then we have the land purchase. And so right now we've been carrying 300,000 an acre. And so for a 15 to 30 acre site, that's 4.5 to 9 million. So that total estimated project cost is 106.75 million to 111. So that variable, or that range is because of the site, the size of the site. Our previous rough order of magnitude was 88.2 million. So that's cost increase because we were earlier looking at I think a smaller site. So and also, as we just mentioned, there's assumptions or there's more information known about potentially the foundation system for this building, which drove up the cost pretty substantially. So that was a pretty significant variable. There was a lot of divisional costs that we looked at that were fairly close to what the original assumed cost would be. So for say like all the electrical infrastructure for the building or all the HVAC, those didn't change as much as what we saw with the structural system on a particular location. And so that drove up the cost. And essentially what it is, it's an expensive foundation system that requires framing, if you will, for the foundation, grade beams are reinforced structural concrete foundation beams that support the loads and then distribute those. So those drove up a lot of it. I'm trying to think something, and there was some site utility and other aspects of it.
Development as well. I mean, we were accounting for the development of a 15-acre site. The one that we estimated is closer to the 30-acre. And again, working in approximate numbers here, not to divulge any information about a specific site. So that definitely increased that. We had carried the purchase price of 20 acres kind of right in the middle of that 15 to 30 in the previous ROM cost as well. And then the refinement of programming and review and things like that, the square footage did increase by just under 5,000 square feet. So that did increase that as well.
So, and we can again, you present this and we have some more information. So if you want to wait to ask questions, maybe till we get through some of this. I think some of your questions may be answered. But on the Wentworth, there's estimated cost of the improvements 2.9 million. Again, using the 25% soft cost is 730,000. And so the estimated subtotal is 3.6 million. The previous estimate was 3.3. So there's not as much of a variable there. And really the difference is a little bit in the efficiency of the size of the addition. The addition is pretty small, so we're not receiving as much in the way of the reduction in the square foot, just using a raw square foot number. When we actually prove it out with the actual scope and the efficiency of that for a small addition, it ends up being slightly more. For the middle school, option one, the construction cost estimated to be 32.6 million. The soft costs 8.2 for a total of 40.8, which is just a hair under what the previous estimated value of 41 million. So that was pretty darn close to apples and apples on that on the middle school. So the total, if we take all of those and add them up, the estimated construction value is 117.3 million. The soft costs on that would be 29.3 million. Again, if we take that variable of 4.5 to 9 million for the site, that gets us an estimated subtotal of 151 to 155. And that is, again, substantially more than the ROM of 132. Again, most of that's explained in that very first increase from on the consolidated community schools, the K2 school, the new one. So,
in its site. And then below that, we did the option for the other middle school option 1.2, and it, showing the same what its construction value is, soft cost, and its estimated subtotal. It's almost right on where we had the rough order magnitude cost. It's coming in at 31.6, and we were carrying 31.8. So the area that we're going to circle back with is really looking at the K2, looking at some of those major differences, because a lot of these other ones are pretty much spot on to where the rough order of magnitude estimated they would be. And what we're seeing is, as we mentioned, a lot of it has to do with size of site as well as development of site and those foundations. Our team got the estimate on late last week. We reviewed all of it and gave comments back to our estimator, and that's essentially we were waiting for the revised estimate based on our comments just before this meeting. So our team will be going through it again based on those revisions we just received. But there are other things in there that we've asked them to kind of break out because there was other ideas that we had on possible things that we could look at, whether it be deferments and other things. But we'll kind of go over that at the next meeting, is once we have more time to kind of go through the detail of the estimates we received. And then you all have a copy of the estimate. Emily had sent that forward. You can see all the detail that goes into it. Keep in mind that those numbers are just construction. It's not the soft cost, it's just construction. So as you're going through that, please keep that in mind. The next step that we will do is dig into the soft cost, and we'll start breaking that down per each of these. It's still, we're gonna have to make assumptions based on site until that gets refined. But we can get more detailed in regards to that to clarify whether it's, truly 25% or if it's less or more. But it usually comes out right around that 25%. Mark, you want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah, if you can go to the next slide now, Lisa. Yeah. And so this is the plan that was estimated. And I think we reviewed this last week I think we met last week. So that's square foot that we are using, again, that was with the different space types, and we've been massaging it, but this is 125,159 square feet. So that's what was used by the estimator. So next slide. So this, as we talked about, there are different divisions, and so and each of these represents an area of the construction value, and then there's a built-in detail in each of these areas. So first division is demolition. So and the idea that you've got removals of items in some of the schools that we're altering. So that's all quantified, both in terms of the labor and then disposal costs are included in that demolition number as well. And then we've got building concrete. So that's used primarily in foundations, and it's where you'll see most of it. And as we discussed, that concrete number was high in the foundation system that we're looking at for the given site that we're considering right now. So that was a big number. It varied much from the original assumption of how much concrete we're going to need to use. Masonry is there's some interior block masonry, and then also the exterior brick of the buildings themselves. So that's where we see most of the masonry. Steel is primarily the structural steel for the building itself, the framing of the building. There are some other miscellaneous metals that are in there as well, but most of that is the structural system of the building. Carpentry is generally wood that's used throughout the building itself. Includes sometimes finished carpentry as well as rough carpentry. So those are the two primary areas. Thermal and moisture protection is a big number. That's really the exterior enclosure of the building is included in that thermal and moisture protection. And so we think of it as the envelope of the building. Doors and hardware is exactly that. So it's all the doors in both interior and exterior doors and hardware on those. And then finishes is a big number too. So that's all of the typically it's includes not only the like tile flooring in the ceilings and the wall board, but it also includes the light gauge framing for walls as well. So that's almost always a big number. Specialty construction is typically can include various equipment that's put in there under Division 10. and sometimes it's food service equipment, for kitchen equipment, and the like. And then we also have furnishings themselves under 12. Those are pretty light number for furnishings. It can be sometimes things such as marker boards and tack boards. So it's usually a very small number. Casework and millwork is the
Keep in
cabinets.
mind on
Okay,
the
yep.
furnishing for a second, that is not the furniture that is in the
Yes,
building.
good point.
That is carried in the soft cost.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Casework and millwork, as I said, is the cabinetry in the building itself. So all the shelving and storage cabinets in the building. So that's what's included in that. Conveying our elevators, so quite simply. And then sprinkler is just a standalone number for a sprinkler system. And any modification, so new sprinkler in new buildings and modification of sprinklers in any of the areas that we're modifying. And then plumbing is just that. It's all the plumbing fixtures and the piping associated with those. HVAC is all of the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment. And you can see that of all the divisions, HVAC is the largest number carried in the estimate itself. And so that just gives you an idea of right now what you see for the cost of that type of system. So
And I will say that's typical. That's not atypical of this project. That is usually the highest division.
absolutely, and it includes controls too. So it's the equipment and the controls for it as well. Electricals, all the electrical associated with the buildings, site improvements. So if you take the division 32 and 33, those are the site improvement costs. Actually, 31, earthwork, site improvements, and utilities. That is the site work number. And so.
And this is site work for the whole project. This is not just one of the schools. The summary here is the entire construction cost of all of the buildings that are being constructed or altered.
And so when the estimator is coming up with all of those costs, they are quantifying the scope by what the item is, how many units it has, what's the cost per unit, and they extend that cost out. So if a door is $2,000, for instance, and there are 30 doors or whatever, then they multiply all that out with the labor included in that. Once they get to that divisional total, that number still isn't what the contractor is going to charge. And so the column that we see on the right hand of the screen, they take the divisional total, which in this case was the 89,011,859, and then there's the value of the contractor itself to actually staff the project and coordinate getting all of this work done, and the cost for them to be on site and for them to staff the project. That is the contractor's general conditions. And so right now it's being carried as 12% for that.
The reason it's 12% is it includes phasing too. So thinking about how we have to approach some of these projects because they're occupied.
So it's not as straightforward as going into an open site, just being able to construct from start to finish without having to worry about moving some things around, doing work. So that adds to the general conditions to an extent. Then that arrives at another construction subtotal after we consider the contractor's general conditions. And then we put the estimator putting an estimating contingency of 10%. And that is because when they are doing the estimate at this level, not everything could possibly has even been contemplated in the design. There's still months of design work to be done. And so there's got to be some allowance so that you don't say, oh, well, that wasn't covered in it. Why didn't you cover that piece in the design itself? And so that, for instance, we just don't know the total number of marker boards there might be in the building or things like that. That just hasn't been designed yet. So we carry an estimating contingency for that. And then in addition to that, then the contractor has an overhead and profit. That's what we're estimating the contractor will want to get for a project of this size in this market. 3.5%. They also, we require the contractor to be bonded and insured. And so those costs are passed on 2% of the total contract value. And then insurance, they carry the builder's risk insurance. And then in addition to that, then we then looked at these numbers as of if the construction were to be now, but we know that we've got to escalate them. And so right now the estimator is carrying 8% to get us to the fall of 2026. And that escalation number is kind of where we're, the question of, well, what will pricing look like if tariffs start to impact things? That right now is our best case of understanding what the cost increase is going to be from what we're seeing in the price now to then. Nobody has a crystal ball to know exactly what that value is, but this is the best case guess.
I want to clarify though, that 8% does not account for specific tariffs. It accounts for escalation. They're looking at if there is a impact beyond that for tariffs that is not accounted for in this. So we will clarify that with everybody.
So all that adds up to that 117,349,015. So again, this is information that at first draft we received Friday. We looked at it through all the trades, and so all of the engineers and our staff looked through to ensure that there wasn't anything that looked out of sorts with, and we did come back with refinements, and the estimator worked on those refinements, as we said, right up till we started this meeting. So we're still verifying and re-verifying some of the information, but this has already been through one cycle of verification, if you will.
Correct. And we're still clarifying, 3 or 4 comments that we have between everybody, but we don't expect them to have a significant change. We got a lot of the big ones in here and addressed, but we'll continue to look at it and refine it and come back with more summaries as we go forward. The following pages or slides, Mark, as you know, have a breakdown per each of the actual buildings that we're addressing in this option. I don't know if you want to go through this in any detail or just have it here for reference.
I think it'll give information. So as people are looking at the slides, I think they'll probably have that information. I don't know that we need to go through that.
And I would qualify it by saying the PDF that I sent you has a note in there that the division breakdowns for all the individual schools have been updated, but I ran out of time. So everything on the right-hand side is updated, but everything on the left-hand side you can review in the estimate.
In the estimate. So probably what we'll do is given the hour that it came in, we'll go back and correct this blue table to make sure it matches the estimate and resend it to folks so that we have them that match before posting. And as mentioned, you have the detail, you have what we've received. We'll continue to go through it. We will send everybody the narrative. What we find it's helpful to read sort of the verbiage that we provided for them to estimate off of. It's easier to understand than understanding maybe sometimes what's listed in the estimate itself. Our next kind of phase of the work is we've started in this latest estimate, asked them to start breaking out some of these items and quantifying some of the costs so that we can start to look at even more reductions than what we've talked about previously. But we're just not ready to speak to that right now, having just received the detail on that minutes before the meeting. But we'll continue to review that and summarize that for everybody.
All right, so thank you. We're at 7:15, but we go straight into discussion. So I think it's appropriate let's stay on this topic to start the discussion block. And obviously, I suspect there's some questions in the room. So I'll just open it up for discussion on the estimate.
I just
Tom?
had a clarifying question on that the slide that we went through in detail, the cost by division. That number at the bottom, the 117, how does that relate back to the previous slide? I think it's slide 16.
This one? It's this number right here, the subtotal option, it's the construction value.
Thank you.
Add the soft costs and the purchase price. Yep.
Thank you.
I have a question on the. So you guys made it pretty clear, right? The primary driver of the cost increase was associated with a more substantial foundation concrete work that has to get done. So if we found a site that different soil types or whatnot, right? So what's the difference between kind of what we carried on that particular division in the ROM and what this number is?
Yeah, in fact, we were looking at that, just as we got the information. Lisa, do you have that roughly what that difference is?
Yeah, we weren't looking at the ROM, we were looking at the difference of the earlier estimate and then the revised one that we asked her to just do. So I don't even want to speak to that without going back to that, but we are digging into that, Charlie, to understand the difference. But keep in mind that we did not have a specific site in doing the ROM. It was literally just carrying this per acre for these different things. And we were using site development of 15 acres for the rough order of magnitude in that particular one. And the site that was utilized for this exercise is double that. So that alone, the site cost itself has more than doubled, plus the foundations. That's where we're seeing a lot of the increase, but we're going back to really dig into what those are. But just that alone explains the majority of it.
I had a question. So regarding the design and estimating contingency of 10%, are we assuming that like unforeseen conditions are in there, like contaminated soils? Is that baked into that percentage, or are we not carrying anything like that?
So we don't carry anything for that per se. That would be well, I shouldn't say that. That design contingency, if we were to find those through testing, that's what we would essentially use that for, to cover that. Right now, there's nothing carried in the estimate for unsuitable soils because we don't have that data. If we were to discover them during construction, that we would use the construction contingency to cover that. But that 10% is, yes, for any of those unknowns that we don't have data on yet, and also understanding that we're at concept. And so more information gets developed and more refinement, so that 10% covers any of those items that have not been identified to date.
Do we have a construction contingency we carry in the soft cost?
Yeah, that's in the soft
We're
cost.
carrying that in soft.
Yeah. We have a bid contingency and a construction contingency. And in that 25%, it typically comes out at 5% of the construction value for bid and 5% of construction value for construction.
Where's the cost of the land?
It's in the table.
So you want to go back that table,
Yeah.
Lisa? Yeah.
So the cost of the land is in the middle column, the 15.
Slide 16, if that helps you.
Yeah, land purchase estimated cost in that table, Sue.
Yeah, okay.
Using the same cost
Yeah,
per
it's
acre, it's just a larger, it's almost double from what.
We'd carry. Yep.
It's a range.
And so we put a range again. That range is with the sites remaining, those sites fall within that range.
And just another question too, kind of talking about Charlie with concrete. Is there any way we could have PCM put another number together just on like a typical frost wall foundation, like a standard foundation? Just so we could have that?
Yeah, I think we asked for that, and I have to look again. We haven't looked at that latest one that came in, but we had asked them to provide that, and in the original estimate, we didn't get that, but for that comparison. So I want to go back and look at the one that just came in because we carried the more costly one because we think that's potentially what we could occur on that site. However, we wanted to understand what it would be for a more traditional foundation for that exact reason. If it's not there, we will ask for it.
So was it the estimators or was it your civil team that determined what the foundation would have to be based on the soil samples?
It would be our structural engineer.
Your structurals. And so we have soil samples on all the sites, right?
No,
That are still
we
in.
have soil samples on no sites. That's what we had asked to start doing, and we wanted to wait for vernal pools determination to do that testing. And so what we did is we have had work done. We have worked on a project adjacent to said site that is being estimated. So we had to make a approximation on what those soils might be based on those findings.
It seems to me that if the soil conditions are gonna drive a $20 million cost difference, maybe it's worth it to, before we commit to a site, to understand the soil conditions at all the sites and, you know, make sure that perhaps that's the determining factor on what site we go with.
I want to be careful that it's not just the soils that are the 20 million. It is, you have double the acreage that is being developed. So that's a chunk of it, but there is millions of dollars in the foundation due to the soils.
But the site though,
Yeah.
there's no reason we can't re-look at the site and subdivide that. I mean, obviously it's a business deal, the seller gets a vote in that, but, right? I mean, we don't have to develop the entire lot. Or even buy the entire lot. Do I have that right?
I think that is something that needs to be talked with the site committee.
Right, and I think based on the site they've worked from, based on their conceptual work, the geometry of the site is such that it nearly all needs to be developed to get all the parts and pieces for us. You know, green space, fields, building footprint, you know, all of the associated support infrastructure.
Yeah, I think something I think the next steps would really be to have a more detailed conversation with the site committee about our findings and kind of where you want to go next in regards to this.
This soil issue is at least news to me, so I don't think the site committee is aware of that different point.
And again, it's an assumption based on adjacency.
Right.
We haven't tested it yet.
But to your point of doing detailed geotechnical work, it starts to get expensive. It's incredibly invasive. We're talking about, you know, drilling rigs getting on the property at various locations. So it's not something that we should consider casually. It should be reserved for a site or sites, no more than 2, I would assume, to do that kind of work.
And understand that we had to, and we, you know, let the site committee know which site we were going to use for the estimate, because we had to pick one at this time based on what we know. And we're still waiting on the vernal pool information. And I think that was going to be the determination then as to which sites you want to do that investigation on, because you may have some sites that come back with vernal pools and therefore you can't develop on them. It doesn't make sense to do geotechnical testing on those sites.
If there's any consolation in these higher numbers, this is, I would say, likely the worst case scenario. It's the largest lot that was looked at. It's apparently one of the perhaps challenging from a soils perspective. So the good news is, if another site is chosen, it's likely to go down in cost for purchase price and development.
And it is the largest size too. So, I mean, I did ask our civil team and they agree with that assessment.
Tom, can I just ask it in a typical land deal for this? At what point would the land deal progress to the point of a letter of intent or something before you do the soil testing?
Yeah,
Or okay.
typically. Yeah, that would be one of the many contingencies we provide for during our kind of due diligence period before we close is kind of further understanding, exploring the site. Not unlike you put a house under contract and you do a building inspection. That's really what it amounts to.
Well, my point is that, so we wouldn't know of those potential savings until we've already chosen to at least get to a letter of intent standpoint.
Typically.
Couldn't do the test.
Typically property owners, won't let you on their land. I mean, having a single person walk around and look for vernal pools is one thing. Having a drilling rig, moving through the middle of a forested property is another thing.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So I had recently read about, I think it's Bar Harbor has a project to build a school. And Harriman is involved, and it went out to bond, and I don't know what the figures are specific to this project, but when all the construction bids came in, they all exceeded what the bond number was. Like, they were all like, I don't know, $15 million higher than what was expected. And something like that also happened in Portland, where there was a $64 million bond issue for renovation of the elementary schools, and all the bids came in much higher. And how likely do you think, I know this is, this is going beyond the rough order of magnitude costs, but how likely is it that we could find ourselves in that situation where we buy a piece of land, we put something out to bond, it passes, and then the bids come in and, they're $20 million higher than what we expected?
Yeah, I'll speak to the two examples you gave. So Bar Harbor, what they saw is a significant increase in trade costs north of Bangor. And it was consistent for projects north of Bangor, especially in the mechanical trades. It was astronomically more expensive due to lack of folks up there able to do that work. Bar Harbor is not southern Maine, where we see a lot more contractors available. That was the significant difference on that project. In regards to Portland, the bond was done years before the design work was done. And so a lot of that had to do with the change in escalation from when the bond was done to when the projects were actually assigned to an architect to be developed. So that 64 million, we were involved in that project. That 64 million was established many years before we were assigned the project. So you're working with numbers that had already been estimated, and therefore then escalation happened, and you had to essentially adjust the scope to fit within the budget.
Right, and that one, actually, the construction costs came in under, when all said and done, the total project was under the total bond amount after adjusting for the scope. But that was, the other consideration, that there was a decision initially to look at phasing the project so they didn't go all at one time, and so there was some time that passed, and then ultimately what they decided was to do the last three all at the same time, and instead of
get a greater value.
One sequentially, they essentially did the last three parallel. That actually saved them some money and bought a little more scope.
Just, it's not a great comparison, but anecdotally, and I could say from two fairly big projects that we've done, that they're not school construction, they're more road, and but in both cases, our bids are coming in notably lower than the engineer's estimate. And I don't know if that's a phenomenon of the engineers trying to hedge their bets and provide for what they've seen over the last handful of years. But I think there's a trend happening out there, settling in the market. Whether that comes to bear here remains to be seen. I think it comes down to having good design work with good cost estimating and health contingencies ought to guard against that.
Yeah, we're seeing actually,
for example, you came in significantly under the budget for that.
We're seeing both that there's a little bit, there are more contractors going after projects right now, and competition lowers prices. But we're also seeing that the market has stabilized a little bit, so people have kind of caught up to the sort of rate of growth of construction pricing. It started to level off a bit.
What happens if you bond, for example, right? Say you bond 150, and then the estimates come back at 100, or the project gets completed at, say, 130, and there's a $20 million delta there. What happens? What does the town do with that?
So we don't typically bond. Sorry, go ahead. You can answer that.
Yeah, a project this size would be bonded over 3, maybe as many as 4 different years, for a number of reasons. One, you don't borrow money until you need it. Also, the federal government doesn't allow you to do that. something called arbitrage. A lot of communities used to bond it all up front and invest it and
Put it
make money on
somewhere
it.
else.
They, these are taxes and bonds. They were making 2 and 3 times what they were paying in interest. So that's a no-no. So we can, and beyond that though, we would receive a bid, we would evaluate that bid and wouldn't sign it if we didn't have adequate budget for it.
I
So I
meant
think
the
there's-
other way.
Yeah.
I mean, if a bid comes back cheaper than what the referendum is.
You wouldn't
well,
borrow
the request isn't up too. So,
Okay.
there'll be all sorts of discussions perhaps to how to spend that extra money, but I think we've got a scope and we would do our best to stay at that. We came in under budget with public safety building. I don't remember the number, but it was 2.5 or 3 million in the end. We had authorization and didn't need it all.
So you just don't borrow that extra money?
No.
Perfect.
No, and I think we would need to stay true to the scope of the work. If there's things happen to accomplish that same scope. But adding additional things in because we have the authorization, I think would be frowned upon and wouldn't be tolerated.
Thanks.
Lisa, have you ever had experience on these school projects where you've been able to obtain, at least like the town or the owners have been able to obtain potentially like in-kind donations from local subcontractors or vendors for the project?
From contractors, typically not. Are you talking about like fundraising?
Yeah, or just like if there's a local, like window coverings sub or something, they're local to Scarborough or whatever, they would entertain like a material donation of anything.
Gotcha. Well, they would essentially they would structure their bid that way to where it'd be a lower cost because they're donating the materials per se. But you wouldn't receive a donation from a vendor because therefore you're eliminating competitive bidding.
As well, like post bid, when you go to buy out, we could potentially do, or is that frowned upon?
Well, the challenge is that, are you accepting the same degree of quality and how do you hold them to the same degree of accountability if they're donating something? And so sometimes there's concerns with how you structure that as well. So if they want to provide what's specified at a lower cost, it's kind of, they can include it in their bid in that way.
Mm-hmm. We have seen is a lot where I thought you may have been going. That we have seen fundraising done, and if that is something that the committee is interested in doing, you do need to indicate what item that you would essentially lower the bond cost through fundraising efforts. We would just need to know in time what that is so that you're not borrowing for that. But we have seen people come forward with fundraising in projects. It's harder than people think, but we have seen it done.
Lots of bake sales.
Well, I think they're more than just bake sales, but yes.
Somewhat similar to that with the public safety building, there was a evaluation done about the potential reuse of that building for another municipal use. We discounted that and said, we want to sell in the open market, garner the highest price we can. And so on the ballot question, there was the total cost from the design process, less an estimated proceed from the sale of that. And thank goodness we met it. And then the request number to the voters took that off. And so it's a bit risky, and certainly with fundraising, I would be very cautious around putting any number there.
Yeah, you don't have to put a number. You just have to indicate that you would lower the borrowing by fundraising efforts. I don't think you have to put the actual number unless you are fundraising for a specific item. Like sometimes a community will say, we will add solar if and offset, through fundraising efforts. And if they don't meet the number, then it doesn't get added. Good.
One more question. Sorry, I don't know, shut up.
Yeah, good questions.
When we get to, which we're going to go to discussion about how do we go about eliminating one of the options. Should we be anticipating that we'll have a larger list of VE that we could choose from by that time, given the timeline with trying to get a geotech report put together? And it's like, I'd love to see 10 more items like Ramday rip piers in lieu of H piles, right? But do you think like just given our schedule, like, will we have a larger list of that to analyze as a committee prior to those discussions?
I think we've already started to come up with some of them, based on what we've seen, and come forward with a handful of those. In regards to the geotech, I can't speak to that yet until I talk to the site selection committee as to how they want to really proceed. My hope would be that, yeah, we can get that information. Or are there projects adjacent to any of those other sites that have been done, not too long ago, to where we can request the geotech information?
Thank you.
Yep.
I have an easy one. You already answered it, but could you say again, what is thermal moisture protection? What's that division?
It's sort of Division 7, so that's the enclosure of the building itself. So it's the barriers on the exterior wall, it's the
Insulation.
insulation, the roofing membrane, all of that. It's the enclosure, the envelope of the building.
Oh, this is a rubber roof, flat roof.
Exactly, a low pitched, yeah,
Okay.
membrane roof.
Yeah. Anything else on design estimates? Timeline for the other option?
We will be getting it next week and we will review it at next Monday's meeting. So it will probably come in similar, kind of right before the meeting, and we'll go through it like this. But we will also be vetting this and hopefully coming forward with more to discuss about this option as well.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right, thank you. With that, then, we'll shift over to kind of how do we want to reduce to one final option. I asked, last week to just kind of come prepared with ideas. And so I think rather than break it up into little small groups, I think we'll just open the floor for anybody that's thought about it and has ideas on how we might do it.
I'll go. So I think going back to the data thing I put together like a couple months ago, I think I would be for us just as a committee trying to develop specific metrics that we are basing the vote for elimination on. What those are, I don't know per se, but like maybe we get a handful of those. And then just start looking at like purely from a data perspective, how that informs those. And then it doesn't, I mean, not necessarily vote strictly on the data, but I think it'd be important to have that as a piece to analyze at least. I don't know what everyone's thoughts are on that, but.
I think certainly would be a helpful tool. I think we'd have to all agree on like any weighting that goes into any sort of matrix or tool that's developed prior to inputting information into it, so it's non-biased.
Yep.
But it's got a good start on it.
I think for me, it's going to come down to which one do I think will pass. And I have heard from people that they might have a preference, but they really at this point don't care. They just want something to pass. So the results of the survey hopefully will give us some idea of which one is more likely to pass. And
well, maybe that becomes another data point to Dave's. Dave's is kind of more analytical, where that would be more preference from the public, but it would have significant weighting.
What information we're gonna use? We're gonna use survey from phase 1, phase 2, 2B. Are we gonna use the information in the townwide survey? Because a lot of that I heard this last few days is we're gonna do this survey and this is what everything is going to be based upon. And that has been the fear with most people I've talked about with the recent survey is, oh, you're gonna get a survey, you're gonna get what you want, that's what you're going to use. I think it'd be best if the committee reviewed all the information, phase 1 up through, and kind of create a metric around that
Go ahead, Larry.
I, kind of comes back to waiting. I would wait this survey we're doing now because it's only based on the two viable options that we've decided upon. So I would put more weight on that data than I would from the previous survey. I'm not saying eliminate the previous survey, but I would.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just speaking for myself, right? Not for the committee, obviously, but in my mind, Jim, those previous surveys got us to here. Right, that information informed the decisions we made to get to here. And the survey that's open right now is the one that is detailed enough to inform the next decision. So if you asked me, I would say, I think we're not ignoring the previous ones. But to Larry's point, we're putting the weight on this one because it's specific to the options at hand.
That's our thinking, but the public is looking at it. We've done 4 surveys in the last 2 years.
That's a fair point.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's up to each and every person sitting around this table to decide what you're going to weight, what you're going to base your decision on. You might rely on analytical data. You might rely on what is more likely to pass. I think you might base it on what you want your vision for the community to be. I think it's up to each and every person sitting at this table to decide what is more important to them as opposed to some of the other factors. And I think you get there by having a robust discussion. And at the end of the day, everybody votes either option A or option B or
Whatever we're
the
calling
exact-
them.
Alt V3 VA subsection 2. But I think that's how you get there. Everybody is accountable to their neighbors, to their fellow taxpayers, their fellow voters, their fellow residents. And I think you have to be aware of all of those factors, what the data says, what the people walking up to Jim in his driveway say, what people are saying through the surveys. I listen to everything would be my advice, and form your opinion based on what you feel is important and what brought you to this committee.
Well said.
Do we make any effort in consensus building, or is it kind of one vote and we end up with a decision? Because I do think it would be much more stronger as we present out if we had some level of consensus versus kind of a split vote. I'm not saying that you have to twist arms and try to get to it, but is there any process where you kind of straw poll first and then ask what people's, what's keeping you from going this way or what's making you go that way, and try to build some consensus around it?
I think it's a good point. I think we also have to keep in mind that it's really not 2 options because we have to deal with deferments as well. Right, at this point? All right.
Deal with the what?
All of the
Deferments.
deferment options.
Well, if we can, unless there's other, I think that's actually worthy of this discussion too, right? How do we address the deferments? Do we think we should consider the deferments and decide on those before we narrow, option A or B, or does it come with, does it come after? How do you,
We need to have costs.
Yeah, it's gonna-
Yeah, first on both projects.
Sure, of course.
And where we're running into trouble with the survey is that the cost for the 2 projects come back to be different. Because we put out a survey saying the costs were the same, but the operating costs were different. The project costs actually end up being wildly different, and that's what we'll just have to figure out how to do it. But I think the deferment question comes after we have costs in both of them.
Well, yeah.
With the cost being the same, the deferment conversation could happen before, it seems to me.
But we don't know if the costs are the same.
No, the information tonight, I think next week we'll answer that
Right,
question.
right.
It's likely not to be the same, right? And so that does matter.
But it's possible that neither will be within the promised range, so the deferment
There's always a
discussion.
chance, Tom.
There's good evidence that.
To your point though, Tom, that's obviously gonna change the way certain people think about the deferments. Like, right, we have to factor that.
Right, so I guess that doesn't change, I don't know, does that matter as to the order in which we did? So I'm trying to get at, do we, as we think about long-term just planning for our committee, do we do we need to address the deferments before we address the option? Do we do it at the same time and the same night? You know, what are the thoughts? And obviously we have to have price to make those decisions, but just from a sequencing perspective, yeah.
I feel like we almost have to go accept the deferments for each option and then put those two options forward.
I like that.
The group.
I agree with that. I was just gonna say the same. Can you back that up with a little bit of reasoning?
Sure, yeah, so we're currently at the rough order of magnitude stage. We were pretty much looking at the same price tag. It looks like that's going to change based on the information received tonight and a smaller footprint of a new build for a neighborhood school. So if we want to get to similar numbers again, then that might mean different deferments for different options. And therefore, maybe if the consolidated option, assuming that it's going to be more, based on the information tonight, we might have to do larger or more substantial deferments than we would be willing to do with the neighborhood version.
Trying to think of the flip side of that same coin, just because the community certainly will, right? And so the alternative is to favor either the neighborhood, the third school option or the consolidated option. And then as a group work on what it's gonna look like to make that option work. Right? Or is that one of, what's the expression? One of six, half dozen of the other?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of just in panic mode because 150 is like.
Be in panic mode.
like,
I
150
agree.
is just like,
Yeah.
nowhere, we haven't talked about that number since we got down to two options, so.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So you're saying we would essentially take a series of votes to get. So I'm going to use A and B because like you, I can't remember the names very well. So option A with deferment option A is, or deferment option, you know, middle school 1.2 is now the option we're choosing. And then we're going to vote that against option B. And we decide on option B that once we know the price that, and this one, we think it'll only pass if we defer all of the middle school work. And so now we've packaged this up and we're going against those are the two that we're going to decide against. Is that how you?
Well, I think if that's how the committee kind of, majority of the committee feels, then perhaps,
Like you're essentially trying to get them down to the same price. So say that we get the estimates for the neighborhood schools and it's much less. You're probably gonna have to, I don't want to say probably. We might, as a committee, agree that we have to do a lot of deferments to the middle school. So that's package number one. But with the neighborhood schools, we might be able to keep all of the middle schools. So that's gonna, as we're voting one or the other, someone who might have originally said consolidated might say, well, the neighborhood school option, actually, I can keep all of middle school too. So that is now my better option of the two as you're voting.
much better explained.
Just a cautionary note, the real trick to this is, and I think it's being talked about, is just to make sure you give yourself time for discussion, because the parliamentary process, you know, someone could make a motion and depending how that goes, you know, there's only one other option. So I think it would be tragic for this group not to be able to have this robust discussion. And I think that's the point of this conversation, is how do we ensure that that happens? So someone doesn't jump the gun and put a motion on the table and you're done. It's up or down.
Yeah, to that point, I think that, you know, procedurally, we ought to either come up with, and we can work this in the, you know, the leadership team can maybe come up with some ideas and put forth to the committee, but sticker drills and non-motion driven ways to at least determine what we think, you know, is, you know, to drive discussion and get us towards a decision without that motion being solidly placed on the, what's that? Something, yeah.
Because it's official, but see where people are leaning.
Yeah, I think Larry said it very articulately that there is something to be said too, and I would never want to influence anyone in the room. I want everyone to vote how you want to vote, but I do think that there is something to be said for, is there some consensus building that we should be thinking about, because it is a stronger recommendation. And if I'm on the fence, you know, and everyone's kind of leaning 50-50, but we have some mechanisms to kind of just look and gauge and see where everyone is, you know, I think that that could definitely strengthen the overall recommendation, make people feel good about putting forward something that, you know, we kind of feel like we all developed and contributed towards as a solution together, rather than just picking one or the other.
Could we do something where you could vote for one of the two options, and then the third category that you could vote for, where whichever one wins, put my vote with them? You know, like, I'm at the point that I just really don't care. I mean, I have a personal preference, but I want to be sure that whichever one we pick is the one that the public, the voters will approve. And I agree that if we put out that, yeah, the committee was split 10 to,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
Which we all know in this room, that's not how we feel, like that we were divided, you know, but that will be the narrative. And so I think, to your point, yeah, like if I realize that the one that I have a personal preference for isn't going to be the one that's selected, I will vote in favor of the one that is going to be selected for the sake of strengthening that vote.
Well, and that's, I go back to, you know, we need to think about ways to kind of get to that
Yeah.
determination before we
So
put
people-
an official motion on the floor.
Yeah.
Ava?
Just quickly, I don't know if it was in the news article that Diane sent out to everyone, or if it was mentioned in today's presentation, but one of the comments that was made last week at the forum was that I think it was in the news article or the TV expose, that the first, what was put to voters versus now what we're potentially putting to voters is very similar. And that that alone might drive people away from voting for the consolidated option versus neighborhood schools. And I'm not super opinionated, I'm just gonna throw this out here, but in a perfect world, I think I would go with consolidated option, but I kind of, and that comment made me feel this way even more, that where it kind of already was an option, that something that is more neighborhood schools driven per some of the comments from the survey, and just what we heard last week is maybe what does pass, but I'd love to open that up. I don't know if I'm alone in that. Personal preference is one thing, but again, it might be a perfect world situation.
So Charlie, to your point about discussion under threat of motion, I'm going to turn to our de facto parliamentarian, Jim. And let me ask you, Jim, if Charlie were to put a block on the agenda for discussion of options, and somebody 5 minutes in were to make a motion, hey, I want to vote to go with option A over option B, doesn't Charlie possess the power to rule that motion out of order based on the agenda and sort of avoid that threat and allow us to discuss?
He would have to justify his reasoning as why the motion is out of order. And then, on top of that, a committee member could challenge that. So eventually, if it gets challenged, we would have to vote whether to overrule him or accept his decision.
I read a little bit on this in anticipation of one of the earlier votes of kind of, and it gets very, very muddy if I were to not recognize a motion and not allow debate. So I'd prefer to not do that. Procedurally, there's all kinds of
It's a
stuff.
good question. The way we've structured our agendas lends itself to Charlie having a harder time not justifying recognizing a motion. Right? If we had an agenda that very clearly said order number 23-005, and then that is the order of business that we are all acknowledging, then it's very cut and dry. But where we've been having these discussion blocks that are kind of more open, I think it would be very challenging for the chair to not recognize a motion.
So with that having been said, I'd like to make a motion. That's, well, and I mean, it can be taken seriously or not, but I mean, I would suggest that we all commit to no motion shall be made until all costs that we're going to get in by time X, have been vetted or presented by Harriman and available to all committee members. I mean, at a very minimum, so there's no possibility of 5 minutes into the block being open. And then perhaps, depending on exactly when that decision needs to be made, that there shall be X or Y number of discussions, with opportunity for arm twisting, convincing, consensus building, whatever. I mean, just so that we have a process that people will not be able to throw motions out prematurely.
Do you also want to wrap the survey results into that?
Certainly, absolutely. I mean, so it's poorly formulated and articulated, but I mean, I think if that's where we're all heading, and I hear that consensus, or I think I hear that consensus, that we commit to do that so that it alleviates concern about, well, I better get my motion out there before, if deferral number 3 is coming up, I want to make sure that I get, option whatever out there.
So first of all, are you seriously, is there a motion on the
I
table?
think, yes, I mean, I think something on that order ought to happen. I'll start spewing if that. Second.
Yeah, I just want to offer a perspective. I think, depending how you characterize and posture something on the agenda, if it's for discussion, you are advising the body, the expectation, the public as well. I think the chair is certainly in their right to rule a motion out of order, that it's not at the right time. That could be challenged, in which case it refers to the full body to adjudicate that or decide on that. So I think there's ways to get past that. What I've observed with this group, I don't think anyone's going to try a strong arm play and do that. I think they've all been incredibly respectful, and I'd expect that's how you'll continue to function.
Can you define it by the agenda? If you're gonna set the agenda for that day.
Sorry.
I
we
need was a discussion.
Well,
Not really care.
okay, yeah, I mean, that's fine. Yeah, do you have, James, did you catch the motion for the
No,
notes?
can you restate it? It was something about no motion can be made until all costs provided by Harriman and survey results. But
Survey results
is
are
it
available, and
is it all motions or motions to declare
motion to
preference?
select the option really is what it.
Okay.
Precise.
Like
Okay.
motion to
Okay.
discard.
No, yeah, okay.
Motion to not make a motion?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, I was serious, but I clearly
Yeah.
hadn't formulated it particularly well.
To select or discard anything until all data is available.
Yeah, a motion to hold all selection motions until all data has been received. Okay, and seconded by Dave. Discussion, sorry, Larry, go ahead. I just want to make sure everybody knew what the discussion was about.
No, I'm good. Don't worry about it. I want to, I think that's much clearer what you're saying, and I'm okay moving to a vote. I'm not formally saying that.
For myself, I think there's sure we could pass this motion now and kind of that will try to keep us in order to that. The other option that maybe is more palatable, I could simply, when the time comes, I could start to structure the agendas more to what April is saying. And, I still want to make sure that we all still have time and opportunity to bring forth things that aren't necessarily on the agenda that you've been thinking about. But we could certainly, do that and be a little bit more structured in our agendas. I don't have an issue doing that either to keep us more on track and on order. And that makes it easier to rule a motion out of order.
That's what I was getting to, that you define it by the agenda, that
Right.
I know you can't say this is a no motion discussion block, but something to that effect.
April.
I would just say on this topic, I'm a little squirrely on this just because I'm not 100% positive that we're all defining the data the same way. And so if there are some people in the room who feel like they have all the data they need, and then there are other people who feel like there's more information or more numbers that they would like to have, then they could make an argument that they don't have the numbers and delay a vote that the majority maybe feels like we're ready to put forward. And so that would be my only kind of, it's a little bit loose of a motion, and just so that would be my
It
concern.
feels to me more like a norm. It feels to me like you're.
It does
you're
feel
asking
like
more
a
norm.
I tend to agree with April. I'm actually leaning toward the motion's not in order because it's prohibiting other members to raise concerns.
I can give you an example towards April's comment is I'm still thinking that the land deal is a big piece of data that impacts this.
Exactly.
And even around getting next week's numbers, using that same site for the small school that could fit on additional sites at a lower cost is like, that could be a big difference.
I totally appreciate the spirit of it. I just think maybe a better mechanism is to just, because I think we're all in agreement that we're not rushing to make this decision. We kind of all have that meeting in mind when we're hoping to be at a point where we all feel comfortable doing it that night. I don't foresee anybody wanting to make that motion next week, or like, I think we're all kind of like taking this march towards that last meeting, but I could be wrong.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
So to that end, and I agree, I think at the heart of the motion, it's just trying to build in time for discussion, consideration, vetting. Would it be easier to simply have a motion to schedule a vote for the selection of an option? And that way, I think it probably makes it easier for you, Charlie, to rule any motion before that to eliminate or select an option out of order.
I love that idea, but I defer to the experts on Robert's rules. Is if we have a scheduled vote and somebody presents a motion to vote before that, is that motion out of order?
Yes, it's a bit irregular, but if you as a body agree that those are the rules, I think you could, yes. In fact, you're bound to follow the directive of this body.
And we have
And the only way that could be done is somebody from the prevailing side make a motion to reconsider the vote.
You're going down a rabbit hole now, Jim.
Yeah, that's how you undo a vote. Yeah.
It is. That also
It
requires a
gets
supermajority.
The other option, I don't want to overcomplicate this, is that you have a chair whose responsibility is to sense the needs of this body and to listen to it and to run the meeting accordingly. If you feel you must have a motion for your own protection or peace of mind, you could further empower the chair that no motion's in order until the chair calls for that. And that means he's responsible to know when to call for that, to make sure that discussion has been fully exhausted. That's just another option for you if you have confidence in your.
There's more power.
You want one of those chairs over there?
Having achieved my objective of having this discussed a little more robustly, I'm happy to withdraw my motion and rely on the good intentions and wisdom of the chair.
It's a good thought.
What I've seen of this group is everybody seems to be of the same, want and desire to get to the right decision. So I haven't seen anybody present motions with ill intent or anything like that. So I'm not super concerned with this, but there is a risk that somebody introduces a motion early and presents a problem. So yes, I'm happy to go through both of those options that were discussed. If we can make our agendas more tight and keep us on point a little bit more in that regard, and keep the discussions to the agenda items. And then, as Tom said, if you guys want to, we already pretty much have a schedule. Thank you, Lisa. I think you saw me point up there, but we have essentially a vote scheduled already for June 16th. And so I think,
That's what we've signaled to the public.
Right.
For sure.
right?
Yeah, so, sorry, Fred, you had your hand
I
up.
was just gonna say, I think echoing what Tom was saying about 15 minutes ago or so, that I think there was a point a month or two ago when we were still struggling with like 10 options. And I think there was that sort of urgency in this committee to sort of, some people, maybe even including myself, jumping the gun to get a motion out there to start eliminating and axing some of these. But I'm actually feeling more comfortable about this whole process than I ever have. And I learned a lot about you guys in this process, and I feel pretty comfortable about how we're gonna proceed in terms of a civil manner.
I'm sorry for those online.
And I will withdraw a second to make this happen.
Is that a mic drops?
So if the second's withdrawn, the motion.
We're done.
We're done, okay. Okay, so, I think, what I heard was we're pretty much all in agreement. We'll wait till June 16th to vote.
And we'll make sure you have a gavel at every meeting.
Phone too, can I get it?
Sit right in the center over there.
All right, we've got, a few more minutes of discussion. Is there anything else that people, that wasn't on the agenda that folks would like to bring up? Yeah, Jim?
I got one. I don't know, Todd or Tom. Capital improvement projects. If we have a project at Eight Corners, replace the boiler, and it's funded through CIP, we know that that school is gonna get replaced. So I wouldn't think we'd be replacing that boiler unless it really has to. What happens to those funds for the boiler? Do we have like a capital reserve that money would go to and be able to use it for the other two schools?
Well, my understanding, so our capital budget is in categories. So the boilers would be in a HVAC mechanical category. And yes, we asked for the boilers for Eight Corners, which by the way are brand new. My heart was crushed when you voted to close Eight Corners. But anyway,
Just
my
increases the resale.
understanding is the money in that HVAC category, even though it was earmarked for boilers for Eight Corners, could be used for boilers at Blue Point if they were needed, because they're in that category. As long as the money is used for the intended category for which it was funded, we can do that. And I'll give you an example. Years and years ago, the IT director wanted a generator at Blue Point as a redundancy backup for the town as well as the school for data and IT infrastructure. And we didn't end up doing that for a variety of different reasons, but it was in the safety and security category. And so now we're using it for other safety and security related items like cameras and access control and so forth. And as a result, I didn't ask for as much for other safety and security items because I knew we weren't gonna do it, but it was still in the amount.
Budget authority, whether it's granted by the town council within their purview or the voters, does provide confines and limitations as to what the authorization pertains to. Most on the town side, and I don't say this to be critical of the school, Todd does, and for good and obvious reasons, have kind of categories, roof replacement or carpet, without specifying exactly where. That does, in my mind, the authorization gives him the ability to stay within that category. He can't use carpet to do something else entirely different.
Yeah.
And the same is true, for other more discrete things. If the project doesn't happen, then we don't spend the money on it. It's not fungible to something else.
And eventually there'll be a conversation between the finance director for the town and our finance director, Kate Bolton, and they'll say, are you gonna use this money or not?
Right.
And then it won't be bonded if we don't use it.
Yeah, and then ultimately we have in the past, we need to do it again, is to have the council actually rescind prior
Rescind the
authorization when we don't spend all the money or for whatever reason. That authorization doesn't ever go away until the council removes it. And we've gone in the past to say, just clean up all these old CIPs.
Another question going back to costing. So each option will have updated pricing on, as well as hopefully a more larger list of VE and alternates. Trying to wrap my head around how we are going to determine what scenario, I'll put a scenario for lack of a better term, of each option we are going to land on from cost. And in my mind, going back to my GC days, like Lisa, have you guys worked with Join? Like, have you been on, do you have a license by chance?
We
Do
don't.
you have any way to know?
No, yeah, I mean.
For the software.
Yeah, to VE tracking.
Cause like, it's such it'd be perfect for something like this. Unfortunately, I don't work for a general contractor anymore, but with that platform, right, you could have like 200, and we're not gonna have 200 alternates, but you could have 20 alternates for each option, right? And you can go through as a group, everyone sees it visually in real time, discussing each alternate, each VE item, accepting, rejecting. And we're working our way through that whole list to finally land on what that total value of that project will be. And then in my mind, we need to have a process for all of these VE and alternate items that are going to be forthcoming, because all that work has to be done. Ideally, I think like maybe a meeting before almost, right? Just to land on what are the actual numbers, because I could just like see us going down rabbit holes of, oh, what about this item, that item? I don't agree with it. Well, let's talk about it, and like do that on every option. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but.
Let us organize all of those and then maybe come forward with some thoughts for discussion on that. But I think once we kind of have a list of all those, it might be easier to brainstorm how we go through that.
It's still it could be in a tabular form, but in a way that you can see the value and what it does to the model.
In real time, yeah.
Would you rank them by savings or
Yeah,
cost
please.
if it's something that you add? Yeah.
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 Choosing the doorknobs is, I think you need to be right.
Macro-enabled
close to the
spreadsheet, Dave.
What?
A macro-enabled spreadsheet, you got it.
Looking at you.
No,
Sorry.
I recommend you do rely on Harriman to bring you the big ticket items, the VE discussions. There's hopefully a handful that are right at this level. I mean, you've got a month to work through this, and I don't want to set the expectation that you're going to see all these hundreds of different VE options.
Oh,
I just
no,
don't,
no.
we're not going to get there. So
No.
you'll come up with a half dozen that are probably the best you're going to get.
All right. Is there anything else? If not, I will go to public comment.
Matt had left the room. I thought
Just restructure this to mask.
All right,
go ahead.
All right. So,
Yeah.
the regular's gonna go last.
Any man.
It's gonna go
Matthew Keith, we're gonna, we gotta do some stuff on Zoom and then we'll go to you.
There you go, Matthew.
Okay, Matthew.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Matthew Keith. I live at 8 Pleasant Avenue. And first off, I just want to thank you all. I've been following this process pretty closely throughout. And yeah, it's such amazing work you all have done working to find consensus and balance so many difficult decisions. So I just want to appreciate you all for that. And I just wanted to sort of touch base with you all about the Pleasant Hill community. I live in very short walking distance to the school, and I heard some comments earlier in this meeting about how, the clear cutting that's going to happen has been communicated and people know, but the board or, the committee hasn't heard back. And, I do think that most people don't pay very close attention to this process until an official thing is announced and it gets bigger out there. And so, yeah, I can just attest as somebody who's been really involved in following this that without fail, when I talk to my neighbors, they are shocked to find that out and completely appalled. And in general, I'm I support almost any plan you guys come up with. One, because I trust the process and have seen it so closely, and two, because like you all have reiterated, something has to get done. But I really want to caution that if that's the direction you all go and clear cutting is the path forward, that big time community engagement has to happen. And I don't know if there's options. I've seen the parking situation myself firsthand. I've seen how bad it is. The cars all backed up on the street. But I don't know if there's a way for the community and the members of the school to decide, like parking versus trees, or what options might exist. But yeah, I just really think that if there's not solid community engagement around that people will organize and be in opposition. And to be honest, like as much as I want to, help shift the narrative in my community and help support it, like if this community is not engaged in a proactive and a way that really recognizes the sort of predicament that situation will put our community in, I don't know that I'm willing to push back against my neighbors to fight for that. So, I just ask that as you guys navigate that, if that's the direction that we go, that you really put a lot of resources into figuring out how to work with our community to figure out, there's no perfect solution. There's probably not even a great solution for us, but what is the best solution, not just on paper, but for our community. Yeah. So that is what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it. Really good insight. With that, Matt, in the room.
So that was one of my items on my receipt from Elm Street vault that I brought with me. In my experience, when you end up in these situations, you can tell the neighbors until you blue in the face. And they say, well, I'm not really sure about that. I don't really have an opinion. Or, well, it's too bad to lose all those trees. And then you cut them down and they throw a fit. Well, I didn't realize it was going to look like this.
Mm-hmm.
But when I said there weren't going to be any trees left, what did you think it was going to look like? Well, then you end up in a situation where you have to put something back. And that can be extremely expensive. And, and sometimes it's even the people that wanted them gone in the first place. Well, now I didn't realize I'd be looking straight at the building without that dead tree there. Okay, you want me to put a dead tree back, or what do you want me to do? And I think even at Pleasant Hill, that situation, they ended up with a fence. So, it always kind of sounds like a good idea, and you kind of get a lukewarm reception until it actually happens, and then all of a sudden people are chained to whatever trees are left and completely stops construction. So it can get pretty ugly in those situations, at least in my experience. The only thing you can kind of do is just say, you gotta let us finish. Trust the process. I know it's ugly right now, but it'll be better when it's done, I promise. And hope that's enough to convince them otherwise. Generally, it's I guess I'll defer to waiting for any of the school board members to be here as I am, but it seems like the 2.6 million, you're also adding staff for additional classrooms as well, right? For the additions and things that are going on in the other schools. Wouldn't that come off of your operating cost as well?
Yeah, so that is a question for Diane, and I'm
Right.
not sure if you helped at all. She has essentially what's called a space allocation worksheet that Harriman gave her, that kind of laid out the classrooms and all the different facilities, and then she put a staffing matrix against that.
What I'm saying, with additional classrooms, you would then increase your staffing cost, and then by consolidating the schools, it additionally come off. So if it was 10 positions, it might only be 8 positions or 6 positions that would be eliminated. You're already adding 4, right?
Exactly.
So you start at 0, add 4, subtract 10 equals -6.
Yeah.
I think
or how it kind of appeared to me anyways, for clarification, I guess. Always hilarious when I addressed that portable question to the guy sitting next to me at the forum. And it was in a similar exchange with Fred and Melissa, where you expecting we're gonna move that portable classroom from school to school to school as they progress through the system? It's not one, it's 5. And he kind of went, oh yeah, I guess I didn't think of that. So, you know, that was part of my sidebar discussion as well. And the other question is, that you guys just discussed as far as like, somebody putting a motion forward to vote to eliminate one option, can't you put forward another motion to table it
Sure.
to a later date?
Yeah, from a technical standpoint, sure.
Right.
If that happened, but I think, sorry, I don't know why I answered you.
Go ahead.
No.
Well,
this is-
yeah.
How about that? I don't, I am out of order. Sure, someone could, I think more we were focused on, like, that might be the night we want to vote, but we were worried that it would happen. So you don't want to table it for 15 minutes, right? Like,
No.
typically we would use a motion to table to push something to the next meeting. So I think
That's-
more the discussion was on like, let's not do it in the first 5 minutes of discussion. Let's make sure we have a good
Right,
robust.
that would be the motion to table until the meeting of whatever.
Right.
60.
Yes, that could happen. I'm done being out of order.
That was the only question I had. I guess that's it. Good job.
Sorry, appreciate it.
Interesting to see.
All right, there's no other public comment. Our next steps next week, same time, same place. And we should have, I don't know if we'll have initial findings on the survey or not. The survey closes that day, so.
We will
more
not.
likely not.
No.
We will
Okay.
not.
So,
We'll be back.
but we do have one more week to continue to get the word out. One more reminder to please, if you have the capacity to grab another stack of flyers and take a route off of Leroy, that would be great.
Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
So please, mention this to as many neighbors as you can, post it on your Facebook pages. If you're part of any groups, contact those groups. I'm gonna be sending something out to every single group I can in Scarborough. I'm looking them up on Facebook right now for all the contacts, for all the groups that I know that are doing sports and Eastern Trail and everything. So please, if you know anybody, you're part of these groups, moms groups, whatever it may be, it can't hurt to get the word out to everybody you know. So we really, really need your help. And there are 7 more routes over there. I really need people to pick up those 7 routes and distribute them. I've cut it down to 30 houses. So there's only 30 houses each. It's not hard. They're all in neighborhoods that have probably 150 to 200 people there. Probably take you about 10 or 15 minutes, maybe a half hour of your time. If you're like, Jim, just don't give me a home address. They won't show up at your house. But please get it out there. We're really trying to get over 1,200 people to respond. We want to get as many as we can because we don't want this going to vote and having people tell us, I didn't know about it. So please help us out.
All right, last thing, James, just for your attendance, in the room, Alyssa, Diane, and Ray are not here. Everyone else is present.
Got it. Thanks.
And with that, motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Thanks, guys. Have a great night.